With Bengals training camp right around the corner, we're always going to start this training camp preview with the thing that makes the franchise go in Joe Burrow.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Today we kick off our training camp preview series with training camp starting next week. Next week. That's very, very soon. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and it makes it very easy to join the thousands of Bengals fans who make us a part of their everyday routine. Shout out to the everydayers and to all of you who make us your first listen. Today's episode is sponsored by Gametime, where you can save money on tickets by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, and using promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And James, we will start by setting expectations for Joe Burrow's training camp in 2024. There's a lot to talk about and will be a lot of scrutiny as Joe Burrow, and I'd say our observations align on this, have noticed that there may be some recency bias in terms of considering quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's ready to prove those doubters wrong, and that starts next week.
It does, and I think it's going to be a unique situation, a unique camp, because I think Joe Burrow is capable, just physically capable, and we'll go over it. I'm sure day one of camp, he's going to make a ton of throws, physically capable of making all the throws that he wants to make now. I believe that. I don't know that. Joe didn't call me, even though, Joe, happy to drink a body armor with you. That's no problem. I made that very, very clear. He didn't call me and tell me that, but I sort of expect him to be able to make all the throws right now. That said, camp starts at the end of July, right? Next week. It does not start in September. And they need him to be ready to go in September. We saw last year what happened. So I do think that they're still going to be cautious. He's going to be aware of that as well. And the other element here that I'll be watching is, what if he's dealing with, and he dealt with all sorts of stuff just last year alone, nicks and aches and pains, all these little things. If he has any little things throughout camp, does he say, I'm okay. I'll see you after the off day tomorrow, and I'm going to take a couple days off. I wonder if he's going to be willing to do that, if the Bengals make him do that. That's a storyline that I think we're going to cover a lot. But as far as him being physically ready to go, yeah, I expect him to be physically ready to go when players, or when veterans at least, report on July 23rd.
One thing to keep in mind is that the Bengals and Zach Taylor generally ramp things up in training camp. So if on day one you're seeing videos from beat writers, or if on the back together weekend day at Paycor Stadium you're watching practice and Joe Burrow isn't ripping passes as hard as he can, as far downfield as he can, none of that should be surprising, even in a year where there weren't questions about his health.
Yeah.
That's just the way this team does things, and a lot of NFL teams do things. There's plenty of data we have that says that soft tissue injuries, especially lower extremity leg injuries, happen early in camp before players are acclimatized. So there's a ramp-up period, even after the offseason program. Even though these players are all in better shape than almost everyone listening to this podcast, the day camp starts, they still ramp up, right? Maybe everyone listening to this podcast, who knows? Maybe none of you are as fit as an NFL player.
I like that you had the disclaimer, that because there could be one, right? Or there could be five.
Dan Hurley's probably in pretty good shape. I know he's a coach. I know he's not like an NFL athlete at this point, but he probably stays in good shape. And there are probably other athletes. I guess I'm not going to name them all. I know there are some Bengals fan athletes who follow the show, I should say, who are professional athletes on some level. So there are some people out there who might be. I'm just saying I know they're out there.
Just messing with you.
we're on a big tangent here. Point is, we shouldn't be surprised if Joe Burrow isn't throwing 100% as hard as he can on day 1, 2, 3 of camp because of the ramp-up period. That's
I'm
what
really
I'm
at. I'm really athletic in college football 25.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Just keeping the tangent going.
Yeah.
I think, is there a bigger storyline than that though? Like, we're going to talk about scheme. We're going to talk about the offense in general this week. We're going to talk about the defense. We're going to talk about position battles. That there's a ton of stuff. But to me, it comes back to, I was talking to a veteran Bengals player after the offseason program. And it's like, as long as that man's healthy. And he didn't point to him, he referred to him. But it's like, as long as that dude's healthy, like, I wasn't in the room with him, but as long as that man's healthy, we're right there. We have the team that can be there and make a push. And
I think
so
it starts as the biggest story and then very quickly could become a non-story. So we're going to sit here and talk about expectations that, yeah, he might take a day off. And is it the Bengals coaching staff that's saying you're not going to practice today? Is it an agreed upon schedule? Is it Zach Taylor being like, you're not going today? Or is it Joe Burrow making the call? Because we went back and forth on that in the offseason program as well. And he's talked about not pushing himself at a time that it's not to push himself. And we've talked about all those things as well. But very quickly, if he's just normal and healthy, then we're talking about those position battles because, after 2 weeks of Joe Burrow practicing every day without incident, or a week and a half, or whatever it is, we're not going to be sitting here wringing our hands over, oh, well, is Joe Burrow still okay if he's just normal? So it could just go away very quickly if he's just normal Joe.
Yeah, no, and that would be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, let's say he does what he did last year, where he's just on day one of camp, where I've talked about this more than probably anyone. It's the best practice I've seen him have. He was just insane. And I actually went back and listened or checked out our show, checked out the post-practice video I did. And that was the takeaway, which was shocker. Joe Burrow is really, really good, but he looked awesome. That being said, I think two things. One, I remember last year, the first couple practices were hard, relatively speaking, for Zach Taylor initial practices. They weren't as dialed back and scaled back as we've seen in past years. I wonder if that will continue, the practice plan in general with Zach. I wonder if it will kind of align with the star quarterback to a degree. I don't think you can make it fully that way, but maybe a little bit. But two, maybe he does come out and has an awesome day one of practice and then rests. Or, and I think this would be hard to tell Joe no, if he comes out and he struggles a little bit day one, then day two telling him, it was a scheduled off day, or is it scheduled, you're only going to get 50% of the team reps today, or whatever it is. I do wonder about that balance too. So it's just going to be a dynamic. I hope your scenario is the one that plays out though, where it just becomes a non-issue and we're talking about football stuff.
Yeah, we're just talking about punter battles every day because Joe Burrow is just himself, and there's nothing else interesting going on. I'm just kidding. There will be plenty of interesting things going on in training camp. Here's my question for you, James.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Burrow knows that he said on PMT last week that he hasn't done a push-up because of the wrist. Will we see Joe Burrow do a push-up at training camp?
No, I've never seen Joe Burrow do a push-up.
Yeah, but you know how he likes to, show people that they're wrong about things, or put things in the face of the media when he knows there's eyes on him.
I think he could do 50 push-ups with a weighted vest on right now, like if he needed to. He's on another level. I mean, he looks strong. He looks thick. He looks pretty ripped up in a good way. So I'm not worried about that, but I do think it's funny. It would be funny if he did a push-up. Hopefully I get video of it if he does.
Yeah, it's just like, he's done things like that to show that he's good.
I would bet on him to win a push-up contest not with everybody on the team, obviously. So I'm hedging my bet here a little. With the quarterbacks and the specialists.
Low bar.
Cal Adamitis, I mean, it's a lineman. Just saying. Let's
continue our conversation on the topic of Joe Burrow. Is it mean?
I would beat all of them, so it doesn't matter. And I'm serious.
We'll continue with a few final thoughts on Joe Burrow's training camp. And in addition to that, we talked about how perhaps some have forgotten about Joe Burrow, but the NFL apparently has not, according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. We'll touch on those topics coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is here for you. And maybe you've thought about giving therapy a try. Well, BetterHelp is entirely online. It's completely convenient. It's going to fit your schedule. It's going to fit my schedule, even though my schedule is about to get really, really busy. Jake Lisco in Canada, he's dealing with the travel for camp and all of those things. Even the busiest schedules, BetterHelp will be flexible and fit your schedule. And look, comparison, it's the thief of joy. And it's easy to envy other people's lives. And it might look like they have it all together when in reality, they don't. Because, yeah, social media, it's really easy to look like you have it all together. So therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
As far as expectations, just putting a bow on that conversation, we focus a lot on his health, his participation, the annual, will Joe Burrow get through training camp and have a normal training camp?
I expect you to do a bunch of push-ups when you're in town. Go ahead.
Okay. That's fine. I, like Joe Burrow, have not done many push-ups because it's
I'm
not
just
like
telling you my
calisthenics
expectation.
is not really part of my current regimen. Anyway, the other bit of expectations is, what else do we need to see from Joe Burrow at this point from a football perspective? And if he comes out like he did on day one of training camp last year and he looks great, if the velocity is back to normal, if he looks like himself, that is obviously best case scenario. Our expectations at this point that Joe Burrow is 100% Joe Burrow relatively quickly in training camp. What are your thoughts there?
I expect that. Yeah, I do. I think, because here's part of it. Even if he's not fully 100%, it's camp. So like 94% of Joe Burrow to us is probably going to look like 100% Joe Burrow most of the time. So even if he's battling a little bit of something, but if he's not, let's say he's 81% and it's rest that he needs, give it and find a way to get to 100% on September 8th, because September 8th, they're going to hit you. And you start here hopefully at 100% and you slowly go down. And there are times when you can re-energize and get a little closer. We saw that last year with Burrow. But when you're starting the year at whatever he was 2 years ago, 70% after the appendectomy, or last year where he just clearly couldn't move and was trying to battle through, it's really, really tough. And so hopefully he can continue to gradually get there. But no, I expect him to be pretty darn close to 100% early in camp. And then maybe they have to, give him rest days here and there to get him to 100%. But I think he's going to make a full recovery. I really do.
Yeah, and it sounded like he was very optimistic. The team was very optimistic that things were on the timeline they were expecting throughout the offseason program, and that continued into training camp, where they expect him to continue to be Joe Burrow and be the engine that makes the team go. On the topic of Joe Burrow, Jeremy Fowler is currently publishing his top 10 at each position list, and we haven't actually spent a ton of time talking about this. Anytime talking about this. I didn't even know it was happening until the quarterbacks list came out, and that's the fourth to last position that Jeremy Fowler has published. But Joe Burrow on this list has reprised his ranking from 2023. Once again this year, according to votes from NFL executives, from scouts, from coaches, Joe Burrow is still ranked the second best quarterback in the NFL. And an AFC scout who was quoted in the piece did reference Joe Burrow's durability questions and specifically was talking about the ACL tear. And I don't think you can talk about Joe Burrow right now without talking about his wrist. But despite all that, and despite the Joe Burrow is going to give them something to talk about, and despite the media-driven rankings that have seen Joe Burrow much lower on similar lists, I find it interesting that the list that comes directly from the NFL maintains Joe Burrow's position as the second best quarterback in the league behind only Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, the NFL doesn't always, at least some organizations do, but in general, they don't react with the ebbs and flows week to week as much as a lot of outlets, I would say, do. And yeah, the injuries, they are a concern, but injuries are a concern for anyone that's dealt with a couple of them. Like I don't think what could he have done to prevent the wrist? You know, I don't really think that's something that anyone could have foreseen coming. The ACL, well, the offensive line was awful, and that's when I do blame on the offensive line because he just took a ton of hits that year. They weren't a good team, but that quote mentions it says no Mixon and T Higgins holdout are big concerns. That's that scout, and that's what I think is so interesting about these lists. And there's far more wild statements, by the way, far more wild statements than that, and not even necessarily Bengals related with these. But Higgins isn't holding out. We know that, right? So let's just say it's an old statement. We'll throw that part out. The one area that I'm not concerned about losing Mixon is the Joe Burrow protection element. Zach Moss is it's a fact, better pass protector than Joe Mixon. They upgraded there. He might not be the runner. He might not be the pass catcher. Fine. But from a pass protection standpoint, there is no debate there that Zach Moss is more established. So when it comes to Burrow, I don't know if that point is valid. But the injuries, sure, they're a concern. I'm happy the NFL didn't drop him far. But if Burrow gets hurt again, he will drop in this list. And at the same time, he's still at the stage of his career where, let's say he has a career year and wins MVP and ends up in New Orleans and hands a Lombardi to Mike Brown. If that happens, then this list is going to get really, really interesting next year. So he could still go up. I'm not completely dismissing that, but he needs to have a big year for sure.
Yeah. The veteran NFC offensive coach quoted in the piece by Jeremy Fowler's even noted his youth is part of why the injury isn't as concerning. And both that veteran NFC offensive coach who called him tough as nails and an NFL executive who was quoted both referred to his toughness. In fact, the NFL executive, I think, had the most positive quote out of all of this, although the NFC offensive coach did as well. Burrow is still probably the most consistent of all the guys, a pure thrower who's in complete command of the offense and comes up big in big moments. So I just find it interesting, James, that there's all this talk about, forgetting about Burrow and the MVP odds and all these things that we've talked about in the past week or so. And then the NFL guys out there that are pulled every year by Jeremy Fowler for this piece, as you mentioned, not reacting to some of the, in some of the day-to-day, as it were, the minute-to-minute, the recency events, not quite as prevalent here for Burrow, which is, I think it should be encouraging that the NFL still sees him as the same quarterback that we think he can be.
Well, I saw it was someone out of Miami, and I forget his name. And look, media is media, and everyone's going to have an opinion. But it was like Tua and Burrow are in the same, and it's like, oh well, Burrow's defense and carried it, and like all these things, and it's just like, come on, man.
Miami has been trying to convince themselves of that narrative for 3 years.
But I don't think anyone truly in the NFL, like even the Dolphins who wanted Burrow, they tried to trade up for him. Like, come on, man. Come on. Like but there are some that just, they view it that way and they think all these things. And I don't think this is orange and black glasses. I know what mediocre quarterbacks look like. We've seen it, right? It's far different than this. So Joe Burrow's second. He deserves to be second. Now, does he have to prove it and entrench himself second this year by outplaying a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson or going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes? Absolutely. And that's where our expectations are, no doubt.
I was just scrolling through the list from Jeremy Fowler to try to find Tua's name, and he's down as the 4th honorable mention after the top 10. So tells you where the NFL is. And that's probably much closer than
sure. He's a good player.
The Miami writer would have you believe.
Helped me win a fantasy title last year. Thank you, Tua.
Coming up next, in line with Joe Burrow's performance, are potential changes coming to the offense, and will we see Joe Burrow under center more, as that theme has been prevalent in the offseason program for 2 years running now. Will that continue at training camp? We'll discuss the offensive scheme that we're expecting to see in camp coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. I know we've talked a lot about push-ups on today's show. You don't have to do any push-ups this training camp or this football season, but what you should do is you should push the App Store, push the button on your phone or push your screen and make sure that you download the Gametime app, because Gametime is the app that's going to get you closer to the first pitch at Great American Ballpark following the All-Star break. It's going to get you close to the action with Joe Burrow when he's throwing touchdowns to Jamar Chase and Jermaine Burton and T. Higgins, and well, I can name everyone. But the point is Gametime is the app that's going to make your life much easier as you try to go to all of your favorite live events this summer, this fall, this winter. And all you have to do is download the Gametime app today. They have last-minute deals. They have all-in pricing. So now you know exactly what you're going to get at the price you're going to get without any hidden fees. They have seat views that include a panoramic view from the seat, so you know exactly what the view is going to look like when you buy the tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Looking for the offense's next step, James, is something that we will be watching throughout training camp. That's a great time to get a feel for some of the ideas that the offense wants to implement. You, well, if you're paying close attention, see pretty much everything that the team plans to do on offense at the start of the year. And the last couple of years, one of the big themes that we've seen is an emphasis on play action, an emphasis on run pass option work from a footwork perspective, from a full offense install perspective. And we've seen that continue in the offseason program a little bit. And with Dan Pitcher taking over at offensive coordinator, a big storyline that we'll be watching in camp that directly relates to Joe Burrow, because we've talked in the past about his reluctance perhaps, or the splits where his performance under center and play action wasn't quite early in his career where he wanted it to be. And it took major steps forward last year. Is that a thing that we expect to continue into training camp this year?
Yeah, I think it's a huge storyline. It's the one argument for why the reps, the non-rest days, why they're so crucial. And that's the balance, because I do think that this offense does need to add more wrinkles that we actually see on the field. We've talked about this. We think they added a lot of this last year, and part of it was simple. Joe Burrow was dealing with a calf issue, and they threw it out, and they were just trying to get by week to week, which could happen this year, right? Injuries happen where maybe you're down some skill guys and you can't run the offense that you're thinking about running. Fine. But as of now, with all hands on deck, why wouldn't they be able to go under center a bit? Why wouldn't they be able to make Joe Burrow's life a bit easier? At the same time, they have a running back in Zach Moss. Obviously, Chase Brown worked on his pass catching this offseason. We've talked about that. They have a running back in Zach Moss who fits the shotgun style. It's another thing. The fit works out. He might not be the player Joe Mixon was when he was here, but from a fit standpoint, feels pretty darn good. And so how they implement these guys, like Tyler Boyd, awesome player when he was here, but we knew he was kind of limited to the slot. Now they don't really have to play a receiver if Jermaine Burton comes on, or heck, Andre Yosavash, if you want to put him outside with Jamar Chase's versatility. Like you have these options. So how does the scheme reflect that? I think that it's something you're going to be eyeing from day one when you're at camp. Certainly I am too. And how this offense evolves, I think, and there's going to be a lot about the defense, but how this offense evolves is going to go a long way toward whether or not we're talking about them making a run to New Orleans or not in February.
Yeah, I mean, you see that Kansas City just last year was able to win a Super Bowl with their offense not really finding its footing much of the year. They sort of figured some things out in the postseason. They still have Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. His receivers tend to catch the ball much better when they're non-Tyreek Hill, post-Tyreek Hill era receivers in Kansas City in the playoffs than they do in the regular season. So it's hard to say that Kansas City just won because of their defense, but their defense did take strides. So obviously, yeah, the defense is still going to be important. But as far as the offense's next step schematically and the things that we're going to be looking for from an evolutionary perspective or a modernization perspective or whatever you want to call it is, one, the continued development and employment and refinement and marriage to the rest of the offense of that under center game, both in the running game and the play action game, the passing game. And then some things that we haven't discussed quite as much, but have come up in terms of trends that we've noticed in the offseason as well. Obviously didn't get a lot of Jamar Chase in the offseason program. So where he aligns and how they're deploying him with the full complement of receivers available, because we didn't see T. Higgins or Jamar Chase for most of the offseason program or all of the offseason program in T. Higgins cases. So with those guys back at practice every day, with the addition of Jermaine Burton, who's trying to work his way up the depth chart, with Charlie Jones continuing to try to lock down the slot job and competing for the slot job with guys like Jermaine Burton and some undrafted guys even that were impressive in the offseason program. That wide receiver battle conversation will be a bigger discussion topic, but with the versatility, like you said, James, with that alignment versatility that they've got at the wide receiver position, seeing where certain guys are aligned, seeing how much pre-snap motion and at the snap motion this team is using this year. Are they a little bit more dynamic before the snap in terms of getting information? And then, they've got the new addition of Mike Gesicki, the return of Drew Sample. So and the additions of tight end. Do we see the tight ends? I mean, that's the rookie tight ends. Are they ready for camp? That's something we'll talk about as a question for sure. But with all these new pieces on offense, seeing how they're all deployed from a personnel perspective, do they go more 12 personnel? Do you see more pre-snap motion? Do you see more of this play action work? These are the subtle shifts in the offense that we're looking for. And I say subtle because I don't think they're suddenly going to be a 60%, 40%, 11 personnel, 12 personnel team. But you might see it go a few percentage points in one direction or another, depending on how they're feeling about the guys they've got in the building.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in a perfect world, what would happen is they would be able to go sort of like how Lou does or has done when they've made these playoff runs week to week. It just completely can change.
And they do that on offense too. They have done that too.
They do it. But usually when they do that, we're talking about going to Denver and it's like 16-13.
Well, I think about like the San Francisco game last year, which a lot of people saw as a big sea change for the way the offense ran.
Sure. That fair. And they've had some success. But then what? Right? Like a bunch of stuff came up. My point is like consistently being able to have the personnel, the scheme in place. Obviously, there's to be more consistent on offense, to be explosive regularly on offense, to generate the first downs needed so you do get those explosive opportunities. Even at their best during this run, the offense has had ups and downs. And you always have ups and downs, but you don't want to be as inconsistent as they've been at times. And so I think that there's another step there. And part of it is simple, I think, is finding ways to generate explosive plays. But how do you do that? Part of it is you put your quarterback in the position they have in empty and let him do his thing. The others, I think you put these other guys in a position to make plays after the catch or on the ground. They haven't really had an explosive running game. So that means getting under center to do it, at least a little bit. I get it.
It's kind of a great segue to tomorrow's show when we're going to stay on the topic of the offense. One way that you get more consistent is, you put your players in better positions and you evolve your scheme and you find ways to take advantage of matchups and you find those marginal advantages. One way that you get more consistent on offense, and if the Bengals are more consistent on offense, they're scoring more than 30 points a game because we know that's their capability, right? If they're going well. So one of those ways is scheme. One of the ways is the level the quarterback is playing. The level the quarterback is playing should be pretty high. We've got a lot of confidence in Joe Burrow. But then beyond that, it's, well, have they figured out the offensive line questions this year? what shakes out with these wide receiver battles? What's going on with the running back changes and the running game that will need to evolve without the bell cow in Joe Mixon, and the desired change from this staff toward the running back by committee approach, the running back changes, the tight end changes. We'll continue on those topics and get into the rest of the offense and the notable battles and things that we'll be watching early and often in training camp coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have